Thank you very much. Again, my name is Shimpei Yamashita from Sumitomo Corporation. And just a word about my company. Sumitomo Corporation is a diversified trading and investing company based in Japan. We have offices in 66 countries, and we buy and sell many things, including, and I have to read this because I don't remember all of it, natural resources, metal products, automotive, aerospace, real estate, media, and so on. And I am in the corporate venture investment department, where we mainly focus on Cleantech and IT, and I'm managing the Cleantech side. And we have investment portfolio companies in US, Europe, China, and Japan. We focus on clean energy, photovoltaics, batteries, biofuels, fuel cells, and also some energy efficiency plays like LED. And our focus in these investments is to generate future business for Sumitomo. So today I'm going to talk about clean tech economy in Japan, which is a big topic. And I'm going to try to focus on clean energy, which is my field of passion, and probably one of the most important issues for Japan. So the agenda is, let's see, which one is it? Oh, okay, here we go. So first I'm going to talk about the situation surrounding clean tech in Japan. Then I'm going to talk about why you don't hear very much about Japanese clean tech companies. Then I'm going to talk about some opportunities that may be available. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about current events. Before I begin, I just want to remind you this is my personal opinion and not related to Sumitomo Corporation. So first of all, what is the reality of clean tech in Japan? Well, the reality is that Japan is still very much a fossil fuel dominated economy. Well, this graph only shows electricity. If you look at the primary balance, which apparently doesn't make it on this version, the Japanese primary power balance has about only 6% renewables and hydro combined. Another 12% comes from nuclear, and the remaining 80% or so all come from fossil fuels. Japan has an additional problem in that Japan has practically no fossil fuel resource. We have to buy everything from abroad. So our energy costs tend to be very expensive. This gives Japanese industries an extra incentive to be carbon light. Not for any environmental reasons, but just to, so it affects our P&L. And as a result, Japan has one of the least carbon intensive economies among the developed nations already. This is carbon intensity, for those of you who do not know this figure, is GDP divided by, carbon output kilograms divided by $1 GDP. So Japan seems to be doing pretty well in terms of being clean, but this is not enough. We have to do more. And the reason we have to do more is because the government has committed to reducing CO2 levels by 25% over 1990 level by 2020. The current CO2 output level is, if anything, more than the 1990 level, so we have a lot of ways to go. And the government regulations must come in place for us to make this shift. So a few of the measures have been passed, such as residential PV feed-in tariff. We finally got one. And some subsidies on home fuel cells. Japan, as far as I know, is the only country in the world where you can walk into a home electronics store and walk away with a home fuel cell. But the important ones that have a big impact have not been passed, such as feed-in tariff for large-scale renewables, solar farms, wind, geothermal, and so on. We don't have a cap-and-trade system yet. We don't have a global warming tax. These were in discussion when the earthquake hit, and the parliament right now has bigger things to discuss. And as a result of this political inaction over the last couple of years, the earthquake is not an excuse. Japan has started falling behind in clean tech adoption. In a recent survey of a global status, of clean tech adoption, Japan did not finish first or second in any of the measures. The Japanese PV industry has suffered, as those of you in the industry probably know. As early as 2007, Japan dominated the PV industry. In 2010 rankings, we've been taken over by the Chinese, and Japanese manufacturers are nowhere to be seen in the top 10. One saving grace is that Japan does have a pretty good R&D effort. This is R&D spending divided by GDP. So Japan still spends a lot of money trying to develop technologies. And a significant portion of this R&D goes into Cleantech. So you would expect that there's a big flow of Cleantech startups taking advantage of this R&D efforts coming out of Japan. But this is not the case. I'm sure if anyone has done research in Japan, I'm sure you've been struck by the lack of new companies coming out of Japan. In the recent IPO survey, since 2010, Cleantech IPOs, China has had 62 IPOs, again, echoing the theme from previous talks about developing markets being great market for Cleantech. US, Europe, and rest of Asia had 10 each. Japan had none. Why? Multiple reasons. One is that Japan has had a horrible IPO in general. This is IPOs in Japan for all industries in the last 5 years. In 2010, we were down to 22 IPOs for all of Japan, none of which were Cleantech. In fact, over the last 5 years, we only had 5 Cleantech IPOs that I could identify. Naturally, this causes the venture capitals to cut back on their financing. And next slide. This is the venture investment in Japan, again, for all industries. And in 2010, we were down to 24 billion yen, so that's about 200 million euros, for venture funding across Japan for the entire year. Cleantech is set to be about 9% of this total, so that's about 18 million euros. You go to Silicon Valley, and individual deals are bigger than 18 million euros. So Japanese Cleantech ventures are facing a financial crunch, probably much worse than the Europeans, which we heard about in earlier talks. So these are external situations that's giving Japanese Cleantech companies difficulty. There are internal difficulties too, most notably in securing good personnel. Japanese engineers are more hesitant to join startups than their US, European, Chinese counterparts, because if you want to join a big company, the Panasonics, the Sanyos, the Toshibas, Hitachis, you pretty much have to do this straight out of school. There's no option to try to start up, and if it fails, you join a big company. So, and also, because of these trends against startups, the engineers and scientists who would otherwise become good entrepreneurs don't have the incentive to train themselves to be entrepreneurs. Now, this is not a Japanese-only phenomenon. Any venture capitalist will have seen great scientists and great engineers with great ideas knowing nothing about how to run companies. But this is especially the case in Japan. And another factor, which is especially true in Japan, is that founders are often expected to stay with the company to the very end. And one of the mechanisms in which this is done is that the founders are often expected to guarantee the debts of the company. So what this means is that the Western serial entrepreneur model, where somebody comes up and starts a company and gets it off the ground and then leaves the company to another CEO and does something else, does not work. If you start a company, you're stuck with it. And this reduces the number of companies being founded and also makes the individual CEOs more conservative in accepting outside control and ceding control of the company, which I'm sure has an influence on the low venture funding that I just showed, because the founders are only willing to finance the company to a point where they can retain control. Another aspect, which again ties into some of the earlier talks, is about relationship between startups and big companies. I don't know of any country where startups have a good relationship with the big companies, but Japan is particularly bad. The not invented here syndrome is particularly strong in Japan because the Japanese companies are so good at taking existing technology and modifying it to their own needs. And also, because of this relatively small number of small companies that are trying to do business, the Japanese companies are not really equipped to deal with them in a flexible and productive manner. One case study, a company called Zero Sports recently went bankrupt. This was an automotive modifier startup who got into electric vehicles, and they were modifying small vans, the K cars, if you know the Japanese car system, into electric vehicles. And they had a contract to modify several thousand vehicles for the Japan Post. And unfortunately, the base vehicle that they were using was discontinued. So Zero Sports approached Japan Post asking, can you wait a little bit until we modify our platform around some other car? And Japan Post said, no, incidentally, you owe us 700 million yen in penalties. Well, this may be something that a Honda or a Toyota can survive, but a startup cannot. They had to declare bankruptcy, and this, I'm sure, left a very bad taste in the Japanese entrepreneurs who are trying to partner with big companies, which is bad because I am part of a big company trying to do business with startups. Another final aspect that I want to emphasize is the information shortage among entrepreneurs. Japanese entrepreneurs who have the technical training and expertise needed to run companies often do not have overseas experience, often do not even speak English well. And so their vision tends to be very Japan-centric. And they're not able to connect to foreign manufacturers well. And this is exacerbated by the fact that unlike other Asian countries, the Japanese economy is barely large enough to support some of them. So there's not a sense of urgency to connect with the outside world like you would have in smaller economies like South Korea. South Koreans tend to be very aggressive in connecting with the outside world. The Chinese also tend to be very aggressive, and I think that reflects on the size of the Chinese Cleantech venture investment market relative to Japan. So I've given you many, many, many reasons why there's no hope for the Japanese Cleantech market. And that's not the message I want you to take away. There are opportunities. And in fact, there are many Cleantech companies in Japan operating, doing just fine. These are just names I threw off the top of my head as I was writing the presentation. There are many more. So there are companies. There are good technologies and good companies that you can find if you know where to look, although granted, looking is kind of hard. And I want to give you one case study, mainly because the company is supported by Sumitomo Corporation. The company's name is Renaissance Energy Research. This company makes CO2 selective membranes. That is, it has a physical membrane that you pass some gas through and it separates CO2 from other gases. The CO2 separation is typically done using chemicals. And this is very energy expensive. If you use this method, you can reduce your energy cost to 1/5. So it's both clean and economical. It was founded by a former Osaka Gas engineer. Osaka Gas is the gas utility company in Western Japan. And so this is a company that was founded by an older, wiser engineer, tying into one of the earlier talks. And he is very experienced. He just needed help managing companies and doing marketing. And that's where we have come in. Sumitomo has 2 people spending full time with the company, helping manage the company and doing the marketing. And I'm bringing this up not really to pitch the company, because the company is not looking for funding anytime soon, but because I think it has an important lesson in that Japanese companies, perhaps even more so than the European and American startups, need to have close involvement with corporates in order to succeed. The takeaways for people who are interested in finding technology in Japan, I think, and these are very generic suggestions. Number one, I think you need to be very specific in what you're looking for. If you go in thinking, I'm going to invest in anything that looks good, you'll probably not find anything that looks good. So this is especially true for it's probably easy for corporates because if you are a corporate, you have a specific laundry list of technologies that you're looking for, and you can screen against that. If you're venture capital, well, you probably need to have a very detailed set of qualities that you're looking for. Second of all, you need to have a local partner. If you don't have anybody in your team who doesn't speak Japanese, forget it. You're not going to find anything interesting. Thirdly, I showed you what the financing situation is. Even if this goes up several-fold, we're not going to come anywhere close to Silicon Valley, so do not expect a $100 million raise anytime soon. By the way, the 24 billion yen total that I just showed is only for venture capitals, private venture capitals. It doesn't include private equity funds. not the private equity funds are doing well in Japan, and also does not include government funds. INCJ, which it makes large on later scale investments. I know they made about $50 million in Cleantech investments in later stage companies. Now, finally, effects of the earthquake, some speculations. I'll go through this quickly. And of course, the situation is changing very quickly, so this is based on current information. One thing is for certain, which is Japan's electricity is about 40% derived from nuclear energy in terms of terawatt hours. So, of course, some of this is going to stay behind because many of the nuclear power plants were actually not affected. But Japan was planning to replenish most of the electricity needs going forward using nuclear power plants, and this appears not happening. So something else has to fill the void. Unfortunately, I think in the short term, most of it will come from fossil fuels because it's easiest to scale up, it's proven. But some of it will also have to come from renewables. We already have a plan decided in 2009 to meet that 25% CO2 goal, and this will probably have to be accelerated. The plan was to derive about 9 to 10% of Japan's primary energy through renewables. And so it wasn't clear earlier on whether this would be met, and I think this probability has gone up that this will actually be met and will have to be met. The problem with meeting this is hard because Japan is not a particularly good place to be doing any sort of alternative energy. Japan, by nature of its geography and the population density, has difficulties with most of the known clean tech power generation solutions. If you want to do solar, well, it's a rainy country, and in fact, during the month of June, you hardly see any sun. So it's a good supplement, but it's not a good source of baseline electricity. And also, any place where you have flat land is already occupied. You don't have any place to do solar farms. Second, so if you want to do biofuels, well, Japan is a mountainous terrain. It's also a very expensive place to transport anything. Good luck collecting your feedstock. Wind, anywhere you have a good wind, actually there aren't very many places where you have good wind. It's populated, so you have severe problems with noise pollution. And offshore, you have fishing rights issues. It's very difficult to get permits. This may be relaxing in light of the current disaster, but who knows? Hydro, out of the question. We've pretty much used up all the dams we could. And geothermal is not only somebody was asking me about this. Well, geothermal takes away hot water from the spa resorts that are spread all over Japan. So you build a geothermal plant, you put several thousand people out of work. So it's also not a practical idea. It's also geothermal, and any of these will not be sufficient to secure Japan's power shortage. Geothermal, I learned yesterday, has about 10 gigawatts total installment worldwide. Tokyo area is facing a shortage of 15 gigawatts peak power this summer. So we'll have to combine these. We'll probably have to rely on fossil fuels more in the short term and try to find a way out of this. Japan is not in an easy situation for energy. Anyway, other possible consequences, just quickly. I think smart grid technologies will have to be more widely adopted to reduce power consumption in individual businesses, factories, homes. Second of all, distributed power storage will probably have to become more common. I think many businesses and homes have finally realized that the grid is not as reliable as we have been made to believe. And third of all, energy storage, whether you're using batteries, small lithium-ion batteries or large distributed battery systems, may become more popular as people feel the need to store electricity during off-peak times and deal with distributed renewable power generation. So, thank you very much. I think Japan has a large energy problems as a result of this disaster, and much of the bad technologies, if you will, the non-renewable technologies are not going away, but I think we'll need to work on renewables as a way of phasing them out going forward. Thank you.
So basically, you are all invited to help Japan develop new ideas how they can get out of this really difficult future, very difficult, and maybe they need many high voltage direct current lines coming over from China because they have more space over there. But any other idea you have helping Japan is welcome, and we are ending in the afternoon the conference with a small improvised session where we also collect your ideas. So during the day, please talk to Shimpei, and whenever you have a good idea, he will be happy to note it down. All right, do you have a question for Shimpei? Please raise a hand. And Susanne.
Hello, my name is Susanne Harder from Venture Capital magazine. My question is, what do you think, what impact will the earthquake and the energy problem in Japan have on the venture capital industry in Japan?
That's a good question. Cleantech, I think perhaps Cleantech venture investment will go up a little bit, but the sample size is so small to begin with that will probably only have a marginal impact. I think a bigger impact on investment will come into the bigger companies who are able to scale up more quickly. And the reason I say that is because the Japan needs solutions now, as opposed to 5 years from now. So I think I don't think the effect will be negative, but I don't think the effect will be that big in the long, short term. And I hope I'm wrong, but that's what my gut feeling tells me.
Who, Andreas?
Hello, my name is Andreas. I'm working on an efficiency project right now. I've got 2 questions. Question number 1 is, I didn't see on your slides anything about taking advantage of the water what Japan is surrounded with. So I would expect that Japan might become the world leader in generating energy out of water, whatever way that may look like. And the second question is, can you give us an outlook about energy efficiency in Japan in comparison what is going on in Europe, for instance?
Okay, so by getting power out of water, I assume you mean something like tidal power. And as far as I know, there is no significant project going on in Japan, and for a couple of reasons. One is that Japanese seas are kind of unstable, earthquakes and typhoons. And second of all, which may be a more important issue, is that anytime you try to put things on seawater in Japan, you run into fights with the fishermen, which is a significant industry in Japan. So I think it's more of a political issue than a technical issue. Okay, and your second question was efficiency in Japan versus the world. So Japan is already an exporter of energy efficiency technologies, not in the form of startups, but in form of big companies that have energy efficiency programs exporting the technology to their partners elsewhere in the world. And Japan does get carbon credit this way. So in some ways, Japan is ahead of the game in industry. Where Japan is still has a lot of room to improve is in the homes and the offices. And in these areas, perhaps there will be some place for European-based clean tech companies, power efficiency companies.
One more question.
So the situation in Japan and in Germany, to some extent, is very comparable. Both are very heavily industrialized countries. So industry is one of the major energy consumers. In Germany, it is almost half of the power and electricity going to industry, and the major share of this energy going to industry is baseload, which is difficult to match just with renewables. So there's a very similar challenge, and indeed, it is probably the challenge for the heavily industrialized countries like Japan and Germany to think together whether an adjustment of the industrial structure could be a way out of this dilemma. That means thinking much more of swing producers which balance the supply-demand portfolio, which help to manage this particular challenge. Yesterday we heard, for example, a very innovative things from Entelios, using modern software which creates a better supply demand. I think these two countries, these two economies have the same challenge, and I think it is worth to set up some joint activity to overcome these challenges. And these can be overcome by creativity, by innovation. It is not a solution to say, oh, we are like we are, so we have to stick to our nuclear power, we have to stick to our fossil fuels. We have to think completely new terms, also in the industry. That's my thinking. And I think joint forces can help a lot.
Okay, so 2 comments. There's a difference between trying to balance power usage and using what you have efficiently and using less. And Japan in the past have been trying to use power more efficiently. But right now the situation is really you need to spend, you need to have 55 gigawatts and you can only supply 40 gigawatts. So this is not an issue where you can balance things out. And if you do not do this, and when you have this kind of shortage, your factories stop running, people run out of jobs, people do not have light and heat, and you're essentially telling people you have to go backwards, you have to lower your standard of living. And this is very difficult for economies to swallow and definitely causes the economy to shrink. And when economies shrink, you end up going to the easier solution, which is fossil fuels. So you really I think you really need to, I think the whole point of Cleantech is to retain our standard of living to an acceptable level while trying to conserve, while trying to have a sustainable growth. So even though in the short term, I think we have to make adjustments that are maybe not completely green, but it's simply because the green solutions are not big enough to accommodate the Japan's needs. Like I said, Tokyo area is going to have 15 gigawatts shortage. The entire production of PV cells in the world last year, according to our study, was 13 gigawatts. So you can put all of the solar cells made in the world last year in Japan, and they could be performing at spec, which they never do, by the way, and you would still be far short of the goal. So we are in a transition stage, and Japan was unlucky to get stuck in that transition stage.
All right, good closing remarks. Final round of applause for Shimpei Yamashita, and here's your speaker gift. Thank you very much, Shimpei.
Thank you.
Arigatou gozaimasu.